Right now, let's discuss this with Thembisa Fakude, Senior Research Fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues, who joins us now via Teams. Thembisa, before we get to the U.S. Statement on this, these findings that were made public by President Cyril Ramaphosa somewhat, let's just talk about what you say, how you would weigh in on President Cyril Ramaphosa's statement yesterday, saying that the ship only delivered arms that were ordered by South Africa in 2018, in fact, ammunition. Many are questioning why the secrecy. Now, he says, of course, it's a classified information. How would you characterize government's handling of this matter?
Well, I think it still leaves the cloud hanging. I think it would have been prudent for the president to remove the sensitive material that was imported into South Africa by Lady R and give us the entire report and a full report. Here we are today, we are still not quite sure what actually happened because we have a summarized version of the report. And the president had a chance on Saturday when he summoned, in inverted commas, the journalists, analysts and academics to the Sentin Convention Center to deliver this report. But instead he chose to have his normal television address, drop the bomb and leaves. So none of us had a chance to further probe or question the president. The journalists didn't have a chance to question the president to get further clarity. And I think it will be a, something to discuss for quite some time, because again, people are not quite satisfied with what's been given to them. They still feel that there was something in there, Lady R, which the president refuses to disclose.
And while some South Africans, of course, are divided, some experts actually say, they do believe that no arms were on that ship headed to Russia. But let's look at what the United States government is saying now. They're saying that they appreciate the seriousness in which the panel of inquiry undertook to investigate this matter. The U.S. embassy spokesperson saying that the U.S. looks forward to advancing progress, with their South African partners on the two countries' shared priorities. But no mention of how the allegations surfaced, no apology to South Africa. What do we make about the U.S.'s government's response?
Well, it means that they're not apologizing, which means, therefore, that they have certain type or certain kind of information that we don't have. But if you listen to the president yesterday, he talked about the people who made allegations, and I'm not quite sure what sort of equipment those people used to spy on the Lady R as they were observing Lady R taking things out of the ship, for the investigators to assume and tell us that those people refused, number one, to come up with evidence. One will counter-argue to say, how easy is it for anyone or any member of the society to obtain that type of information wherever you might be situated to the ship? So it, again, doesn't convince me that much that, it assumes or take it for granted that people had an access to the ship while it was docked in someone's time and they could just walk to the ship and inspect it. But that was not the case. So we'll have to wait and see how it goes. But again, those suspicions and dissatisfactions remain. And I think as long as we don't have that full report, people are going to continue with the speculations on what actually happened.
The president saying yesterday, that the allegations, of course, have tarnished the image of the country as well as its economy and its currency. Just talking about the relationship between the U.S. and South Africa, of course, we know that, earlier this year that, efforts by the lawmakers, bipartisan lawmakers in the U.S. in June asked the White House to remove or to move the AGOA forum due to be hosted in this country, in November, raising the possibility that the country would be excluded from the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act when it comes up for renewal in 2025. Just talk to us about how then the two countries will move forward just to mend their relationship and avoid the sensitivities around this time, particularly as we look at what is under threat in relation to AGOA.
Well, I think both countries are on the back foot. The United States, especially the embassy of the United States in Pretoria, should continue the rapprochement and mending offences between itself and the government of South Africa, because clearly, judging by the utterances when this whole debacle occurred, there is a concern that the relationship has deteriorated between the two. So we'll have to see what Robin Begetty and his embassy will have to do in terms of making sure that they improve that relationship. But at the same time, the South African government also has a responsibility of convincing the United States that it is actually embracing an unaligned position when it comes to Ukraine, because that's where the whole thing started, or that's why the current debacle started. South Africa has been found wanting on many occasions, including hosting the military drills on the very same day when Ukraine was commemorating the invasion of its country by Russia. So South Africa has made a lot of missteps and flip-flopped over the years, including hosting the Russian senior ministers in this country and telling the world that Russia is the friend and no one will dictate the friendship. So there is a need for both countries to make some rapprochement. But right now, all of us, of course, are looking at AGOA, and hopefully those negotiations are not going to be disturbed, and we will see a renewed arrangement between South Africa and United States when it comes to AGOA. So the report yesterday, to an extent, assisted in that regard. But again, as I've said, I don't think the Americans are satisfied, given that the report is classified, only the summary has been given.
And just as, we wrap up this part of the conversation, just talk to us then about those key learnings. Many saying that South Africa needs to actually be very strategic in terms of, who it aligns itself with, just some key learnings from this particular issue.
I think South Africa has to learn to be a swing state. In other words, they have to learn to be friends to everyone. At the moment, we are taking position. And we articulate that position often. It might not be President Cyril Ramaphosa, but some of his ministers and the leaders within the ANC often articulate the position of South Africa, particularly when it comes to the United States. We always punch way above our weight in terms of our significance, and we pretend as if we can survive without the United States. So that's one lesson which I think is very important. And I think the rapprochement and this continual interaction between ourselves, the United States and other Western countries, particularly with the advent of BRICS, is key, because we do have a very strong economic and political ties with these countries, and we can't afford not to have that continuing. But the position often is that we can survive and we can do without the United States, which is actually not necessarily true.
Just talking about South Africa finds itself in the back foot in terms of this issue. I want to talk about something completely different. And as we wrap our conversation, of course, South Africa has come under criticism in some fronts because President Cyril Ramaphosa is currently attending the inauguration of President Emmerson Mnangagwa in Zimbabwe. Just your thoughts on what this means essentially for South Africa, particularly at the time that these elections have been called into question by the SADC observer mission?
Well, not only SADC observer mission, but also the European Union have found that the elections in Zimbabwe did not meet the democratic criterion or the standards of a democratic election. So the SABC report was actually even more damning. But importantly is that Zimbabwe decided to embrace or adopt the patriotic bill on the eve of the elections, which meant that most opposition parties could not actually campaign freely, because the patriotic bill suggests that anyone who criticizes the government or criticizes the government could be arrested, and that in itself was intimidation. And we saw just before the elections, there were a lot of delays in terms of providing the ballot boxes, particularly within the urban areas. There was intimidation during the counting, and pictures don't lie. SABC flighted some of those pictures. So it is concerning that President Cyril Ramaphosa had to go, but again, he had no choice. He's one of the most important neighbors to Zimbabwe, so he had to go. My only concern, and I hope this will be the case moving forward, is that the ANC and the South African government will cease to be the full soldiers and the lobbyists for the Zimbabwean government moving around the world calling for the lifting of sanctions. I think the Zimbabwean government need to do that for themselves. All we need to do henceforth is to put pressure so that the Zimbabweans can realize their freedoms and basic rights, and the country can begin to develop as we continue suffering and our infrastructure suffocated because of the influx of Zimbabweans who suffer from abuse by their own government.